for joining. We're going to get started. I'd like to introduce Nicole Allen. She's a national treasure when it comes to open education and public policy and promoting open educational resources. So super excited to have her with us today to speak. So welcome.
Hello everyone, thanks for coming. You found a nice box to put my laptop on. So I felt like you had the whole time. It's really exciting to be here. I remember talking with Spencer a while back when this was in early formations. I was like, I have to come. And I'm so thrilled to be here. So I come from an organization called Spark. We work at the national level on policy and advocacy. We're a library membership organization working to make open the default in research and education. And what I'm here to do is provide some national context around the exciting work that's happening here in Colorado, talk about some trends, best practices that are happening in other states and lessons learned, and also talk about some of the challenges that we're facing in the future as the textbook market continues to evolve. So I have 86 slides, a little fast, but everything I'm going to talk about is cited in my slides, which I'll post on Twitter. I have not put them in the Dropbox, but I will do that as well. So don't worry if you miss something. You can always go back and look it up. So I want to start by taking a step back actually to a year ago when I was out here in Denver at the Gwilla, Colorado of Alliance of Research Libraries conference, where I was the first speaker and told a little bit of a story about my own experience as a student advocate and how I got involved in being an open education advocate. So actually, I'm going to stop. You can't see any of this. Can we turn off these lights? So I started. Oh.
Too much?
What do you think? That's a good video. Okay, we'll have this conversation in the dark.
Do you want me to turn back
No, it's good.
No, it's good. It's good.
Off?
Off.
All right, let's do it. Gay or nay? So I shared a story of how my origin story as an open education advocate, which started in 2005 when I was an undergraduate at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington, and was involved in a student organization that was fighting back against a $12 billion cut to federal financial aid programs that Congress was pursuing at the time. Worked with students all across the state to lobby a key swing vote in Washington State, Congressman Dave Reichert. And it all came down to like the day before the vote. We were all standing outside in the pouring rain with signs. They were covered in packing tape so that they wouldn't melt in the rain. It felt like screaming into the void. But about halfway through the rally, somebody came out of the congressman's office and asked to speak to the organizer. And it wasn't really until that point that I realized that was me. And my first reaction was like, oh shit, like, am I in trouble? And then what actually ended up happening is that they brought me upstairs and put me on the phone with the congressman who'd stepped off the floor of the US House of Representatives and took a half an hour out of his day to listen to what I had to say about federal student aid policy, which was very little technical information. But I had really strong opinions about Congress cutting funding from student financial aid programs when so many students across the country were struggling with the high cost of education. And while he didn't ultimately end up changing his vote, he did actually end up voting with us, with students, on several other key reforms that happened in future years. So what I learned from that experience is that you don't need to be an expert. You don't need to know all of the details about something. You care about it and to take action to help advance a cause that you believe in. And the message of the talk that I gave last year was this idea of be the person you've been waiting for. If you want to see change, if you believe that open educational resources or other things need to change in the world around you, think about ways that you can be the person to make that change. And no matter who you are, where you are, how little or how much power you have, how much knowledge you have, there's something you can do. So I'm going to use that to sort of frame the talk that I'm going to give, talking about leadership and how different ways that institutions and states and governments are helping to lead with this issue, and some of the challenges we have ahead where leadership is really important to help solve them. So I'm going to fast forward a couple of years from 2005 to 2008, which is when the Cape Town Open Education Declaration was published, which was kind of the first major articulation of the global open education movement. This was 11 years ago. It starts with the phrase, "We are on the cusp of a global revolution in teaching and learning." And this provided an articulation of what we were trying to accomplish as a movement, making sure that everyone, everywhere, all across the world had not only the ability to access knowledge, but the ability to participate in it and contribute to it, and knowingly shape it together with teachers and students. And if you go back and read this, it's actually surprisingly still very relevant to the world that we're in today. But we've made a lot of progress. So, back in the early days of the open education movement, the kind of main projects were things like MIT's OpenCourseWare, which sort of popularized the idea of open educational resources, having MIT professors share resources that they were already creating in the course of their teaching online under an open license so that anyone could use them and benefit from them. And of course, this program has helped over 300 million people across the world get access to information. It's elevated the profile of MIT and also created new opportunities for developing new ways for the delivery of educational materials. So in the early days, there were projects that are still around today, OER Commons, repositories of open educational resources, Merlot. But at this time, there just wasn't the amount of material that there is right now. In fact, when I graduated college, the first thing that I did was work with a student organization to launch a national campaign for open textbooks. And our first step was to go out and find all of the open textbooks. And do you know how many we found? 5. 5 that were, of high enough quality to legitimately build a campaign around. But students have been a core part of this movement from the very beginning, starting in the late 00s and continuing on until today. Students have been a huge part of just driving this conversation on campus. The textbook broke movement has helped elevate the visibility through social media. Students can help visually illustrate the impact of textbook costs. Students get out there and rally for policy and campus awareness. And the work that the student organization I was with at the time did helped actually elevate the idea of open educational resources into the public spotlight. So in the summer of 2008, there was it broke through into the national higher ed affordability debate with articles in USA Today, Time, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, talking about the coming open textbook revolution. Of course, it took 10 years to get to where we are, but we have come a long way. In the intervening years, there are things like, Rice announced OpenStax. One of the early open textbook projects, Flat World Knowledge, ended up going away. But of course, OpenStax has become widely used across the country. University of Minnesota launched the first open textbook catalog, which is developed into the Open Textbook Network in this time. And campus libraries started to become a key force in driving forward the open education movement. Students are really important in terms of raising awareness and creating opportunities for change. But students can start the conversation. They can't always finish it. They're not the ones that can sit down with a faculty member and help them identify open educational resources, figure out how to get it into their course, how to get a print copy into the bookstore, and libraries are increasingly stepping up and filling that role. And my organization, Spark, as a library membership organization, has been working to bring libraries along into this space since 2013. Some of the ways that libraries and campuses are leading open educational resources, so one is actually publishing. Oregon State University was one of the first libraries to step forward and actually publish open textbooks. Many more are currently developing programs. UMass Amherst was one of the first libraries to launch a mini grant program where faculty are provided small stipends to develop or adopt open educational resources, which has now been widely adopted, and I think some of the grant programs that are being implemented here with the state funding are likely to follow similar models pioneered by libraries like UMass. We're starting to see a growing trend of actually open educational resource professionals, which is really exciting, that there's staff dedicated to having the skills and understanding of how to actually implement the somewhat complicated space that is open educational resources and help faculty navigate that. And University of Oklahoma was the first to really establish a truly dedicated open education librarian position. Now, outside of libraries, there's a huge amount of leadership happening, well, and including libraries too, at the community college level. One of the great leading programs is Maricopa Millions out of the Maricopa Community College District in Arizona, where they set a goal of saving students $5 million and have expanded that. They just went over $11 million. And have used this goal of saving students money to motivate faculty and start conversations on their various campuses. And they actually have a tracker on their website that they've had going over time and can celebrate important milestones. As the congressman mentioned this morning, or sorry, the governor, I knew him when he was a congressman, Z degrees are an important avenue where community colleges in particular are leading. Tidewater Community College, the first to start one of these programs. An executive at Tidewater Community College was sitting in a panel where somebody suggested the idea of creating a fully textbook-free degree. He was like, I'm going to do that. And working with faculty on the campus, they were able to launch the first one, the Tidewater Community College. And since then, the idea of OER degrees or Z degrees has expanded to many campuses across the country, in part with the help of the Achieving the Dream OER initiative, which was funded by Hewlett Foundation and other funders that supported 38 campuses to develop OER degrees and share back those materials. And they've actually done some really important work at not only developing materials or degrees, but actually looking at the question of, how do we sustain these types of initiatives? And they just produced a report that's actually great. They put forward this framework for sustaining OER degree pathways that includes the 3 steps of resources, so how to make it sustainable financially, infrastructure, how to make sure that your materials are stored in a way that's renewable and preservable. And then finally, culture, working on the culture change at your institution. So OER is not only acceptable, but it's rewarded. And this culture piece is really important. And we're starting to see some amount of leadership in the issue of recognizing OER as a true form of scholarship and contribution to academics. And again, the governor this morning made a call for this, which I thought was fantastic. An interesting model is the University of British Columbia has actually included explicitly that open educational resources are an acceptable form of demonstrating educational leadership in your tenure and promotion guidelines. This is for their professor of teaching track, and this actually ended up coming about thanks to student advocates who brought this forward to the committee that was rewriting the guidelines. So, obviously, culture change and tenure and promotion reform are longer-term projects. There are steps we can take in the meantime. What I love is Texas A&M University. They have launched an open education material award where every year they give a couple of professors an award for doing something innovative or impactful with open educational resources. So that's something that can go on their CV, and it just gives them an opportunity to get recognized and appreciated for the extra effort that they've put into making those materials better for their students. So that's sort of the institutional leadership space. I want to transition to talking a little bit about state leadership. So this map represents, and your state is in fact on the map. This map represents states who have launched some kind of major OER initiative or OER policy at the K-12 or higher ed level. It's over half at this point, which is exciting. This is actually out of West Virginia, just joined the club. And this kind of momentum has been building over the years. And there are different types of policies that have been implemented by different states. And you know, I think here in Colorado, you have a really, I think, great approach to the policymaking process. I want to recognize that first there was sort of a council to bring together stakeholders, understand what the needs of the state were, and then go back to actually produce a piece of legislation. And the trends that I'm actually going to talk about in other states, a lot of them are actually reflected in the legislation that's here. And I also want to recognize that state legislators are just a really important partner in all of this, and I know that we have Representative Nicole here, and it's just awesome that you took the time to be here to meet with this community. State leadership can be so important in setting the tone for what happens on campuses, and I think the legislative framework, nothing's perfect. But when I talk with other states and make recommendations, I found myself pointing to Colorado a lot more frequently. So you're in a good position, and it's an exciting platform to move forward on. So a couple of things that are happening in other states. Massachusetts is actually in the midst of following like a similar pathway that Colorado did, and they've convened a task force to make recommendations. I think they're actually looking at some of the legislation here as a potential model. Other states have developed task force. West Virginia created one this year. Connecticut's had one in the past. California, for better or worse, there's the California Open Educational Resources Council, which spells coerce. But doing great work. So another area of growth is in the area of state funding for OER. I think one of the things that's of course you have funding here in Colorado, but one of the states that hit the headlines is New York State, which for 3 years in a row now has appropriated $8 million for the SUNY and CUNY systems to run open educational resources programs. But I think one of the exciting things is that there's a lot of evidence that even a small investment in open educational resources can go a long way. North Dakota in 2015 invested $110,000 in an open educational resources initiative, and their state auditor actually did an official performance audit on this program. And what they found is that the savings for students were between 10 and 20 times the original investment. And what area of higher education policy can you spend $1 and save students $10 or $20? So much of our work to make higher education more affordable for students is about finding $1 to save students another $1. And that's work is important, and we as a society need to grapple with those questions. But we also need to look at these areas of efficiency where we can have a significant impact. And this is one of them. So another state trend we're seeing is course marking, so requiring institutions to mark in course catalogs which courses or materials are either open educational resources or low cost. I understand that there's a directive in the Colorado legislation around that. Oregon was the first state to do that. Texas was the first to mandate it for every institution in the state. These have proved pretty tricky to implement just because it requires a lot of logistics in the states between the institutions, especially when their students are taking classes at multiple campuses and need to understand the differences between the types of markings that are adopted. But one of the great things that came out of the Texas legislation is a toolkit that a librarian at the University of Texas Arlington, Michelle Reed, developed. She's actually in a leadership program that Spark runs at the time. And this helped institutions across the state of Texas actually implement that policy. So thinking through implementation before policy is passed is often important. And promoting statewide coordination. This is actually being turned into a book that's going to be released that provides a guide for effective course markings. So mistakes have been made. I think the example in Hawaii really illustrates why it's important to have relationships and conversations with your state legislature and make sure that they understand the issues. We think a well-intentioned legislator in Hawaii introduced a piece of legislation last year that would have mandated that all faculty switch to OER, prohibited the use of paid-for materials, and required faculty to create materials if they couldn't find OER that fit their courses. So basically, everybody's worst nightmare, including the OER advocates in the state. And this created a tricky situation because faculty obviously reacted to this really strongly because this is just not the kind of policy that OER advocates support. But faculty assumed that OER advocates were behind it. So the great work of the OER advocates in Hawaii was able to actually turn this to good. The bill was changed so that it didn't include a mandate anymore, and the OER advocates were actually able to build a stronger relationship with faculty by showing that we're on your side and we support academic freedom, and we want to help you transition to OER, but mandating is never the right way to go about it. So policy can be tricky. And I think that's one of the reasons that having strong leadership from your governor is really important. In the state of Rhode Island, the Governor Gina Raimondo announced an open education initiative. She challenged the state to save students $5 million in 5 years. And there's no policy behind this officially, but it is a program and a goal set forth by the state government that's brought the 14 institutions of higher education in Rhode Island, small state, together to accomplish really impressive results. They're almost halfway to their goal. So policy doesn't always need to precede state-level initiatives, although it can be helpful in providing strategic frameworks. The MOST initiative in Maryland is another great example of a state-led initiative that's coming from within. There are exciting developments in the state space with the compacts, the regional compacts that support higher education chief officers in the state. The Midwestern Compact, NEC, worked with WCET and WICHE to organize a conference in December that brought together leaders from all of their constituent states in the Midwest. There were state legislators there, there were Department of Ed officials, there were OER librarians, senior administrators at institutions that all got around tables and just had conversations about how do we advance OER in our state. And I think you're really lucky here in Colorado to have that convening authority and statewide conversation. I encourage you to think about ways to keep in touch with each other and really build those ties and support each other. So I want to move to the national level now quickly. This is a picture of a group of us. I think Delmar's not doing this picture. We went out to Congress and spent a day during Open Education Week meeting with various congressional leaders about open educational resources to try to keep moving the needle forward. There's been advocacy at the federal level for 10 years with support from former Congressman Polis early on, and championed by a variety of other legislators on both sides of the aisle. The first major development at the national level was actually in 2011 with the TACT program, which is possibly the most ridiculous acronym that has ever been invented. It stands for the Trade Adjustment Assistance Community College and Career Training Grant Program. And it was a $2 billion grant fund that was to support the improvement of workforce training programs at community colleges. And the Department of Labor included on each of the 4 rounds of funding a requirement that if you develop educational materials to this program, you need to release them under an open license, so that we're not just funding a bunch of community colleges to develop programs at their own institutions, but that we're actually generating materials that can be valuable elsewhere. There are all sorts of exciting examples that came out of this. For example, there's an institution in the state of Chihuahua in Mexico that took materials developed by the Arab Washington Consortium in Washington state and translated them into Spanish. and actually use them in a State Department funded project through USAID. So the State Department was actually able to leverage materials that were developed through another government grant to support more activity and put the money we had toward other efforts such as technology and professional development. So exciting examples of the way that open licensing can help unlock publicly funded resources for the public's benefit. And since the Department of Labor has actually adopted a department-wide policy that all materials developed through discretionary grants need to be openly licensed, and just in the past 2 years, the Department of Education has as well. So during the Obama administration, the first half there wasn't as much activity on open educational resources, but in 2014, our national open government plan through the Open Government Partnership included this phrase. This was the first statement that came out of the White House in support of open education. It was just like, even this small phrase that the United States is committed to open education helped unlock a lot of conversations and opportunities within the administration. The Department of Education in 2015 launched the #GoOpen initiative, which is at the K-12 level. Worked with districts and states across the country to make commitments to use open educational resources, organize professional development and networks to support each other. This still continues, mostly as a community-based effort, but still having an impact. More recently, we've had some exciting developments last year. For the first time, Congress included funding in the federal budget to support the development of open textbooks. It was $5 million in the fiscal year 2018 budget. $5 million is very small in the context of the federal government, but it is a really significant statement in that our elected officials at the federal level believe that not only is textbook cost an important part of the broader higher education affordability debate, but that open educational resources are the way that we should tackle it. Former Congressman Polis helped lead this initiative on the House side. And the bill that Congressman Goose mentioned this morning, the Affordable College Textbook Act, would make this grant program, which is currently temporary. Each year we need to go back and get more funding and fight to get that in the budget. We've made some good progress on it, getting a third round of funding this year, but the federal budget process is very uncertain at this point overall. But this legislation that Congressman Goose has introduced in the House is also championed in the Senate by Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois. It would permanently create a federally funded open textbook grant program that would provide just more structure and clarity around what the kind of grant program should look like, and hopefully lead to a longer-term federal investment in catalyzing campus action. The government is never going to be in the business of funding all course materials everywhere, but it can provide important startup capital and incentive funding to help move things forward. And that bill number is HR 2107. So at the international level, there's lots going on outside of America. UNESCO organized the second World OER Congress in 2017. The first was in 2012. They brought together delegates from over 100 countries to talk about open educational resources. And as the governor mentioned, mentioned this morning, UNESCO has actually created a set of recommendations that are going to be ratified at the General Assembly this fall. Some examples of countries that are doing great things. Brazil has included an open licensing requirement as part of their national textbook purchasing program. They actually make the single largest textbook buy of any country. Because here, we buy a lot of textbooks, but it's all state by state. They purchase them centrally, nationally, and require all digital resources that come with the material to be openly licensed, and give publishers the option to sell the copyright to the government so it can be released under an open copyright as part of the procurement process. So steps in the right direction. Poland also included a open textbook Pilot is part of their digital schools initiative where they developed a bunch of free and open textbooks for the primary level. In Poland, parents actually need to purchase the textbooks for their public schools. It's not typically the case here for public school. So a lot of the same drivers in terms of affordability and access here at the higher ed level are true there at the K-12 level as well. So this is all to say we've come a really long way. Like, we're in a totally different place than we were 10, 15 years ago. Even just like the recent statistics that you look at from like the Babson report that was put out earlier this year. Awareness of OER, 46% of faculty say they have some level of awareness of OER. That was 0. So that's really, really significant. That's almost half. It doesn't, we still have a long way to go, but this is the work that this movement has done over the past decade. 13% of faculty say that they're using OER as a required material in at least one of their courses. There's some wiggle room in whether that number is perfectly accurate, but like even if it's half of that, that's huge. That's progress and that's enormous. We see news like this come out. University students save $177 million in 2008 using OpenStack materials. Even at the campus level, students saving $3.3 million at one campus. And we've actually been able to track $1 billion in student savings worldwide since the inception of the Open Educational Resources Movement. So, this is real. This is real progress that we've made. And it's evident in the commercial publishing industry. So a lot of you see this graph, graphs like this, looking at the cost of college textbook. But it's actually that last part that's really interesting. How it's jagged. It's still going up, but it's a clear sign that there's disruption happening in the market. And for many years, the publishing industry has just sort of like ignored OER and said, like, if you want to do free stuff, that's fine. It couldn't possibly be high quality. But 10 years later, what we get is, for example, the Association of American Publishers, that's the publisher lobby, puts out press releases highlighting that some of their publishers publish OER. You see publishers putting out headlines like this, talking about how they've saved students. We'll get to this. We're transitioning.
Wow.
Yeah. And then there are things like this, which is a fact sheet put out by Cengage Learning that includes all of these statistics about how students can't afford their textbooks and all of the things that they're sacrificing. 4 in 10 students skip meals because of the cost of course materials. 3 in 10 have taken fewer classes. Like, these are all statistics that we use to advocate for open educational resources and make the case for why it's needed. That's being put forth by Cengage Learning, one of the currently 5, soon-to-be 4 major publishers in this space. So we're at this interesting transition. So when we started the movement, the objective was clear. It's like, textbooks are way too expensive. This is terrible. We have a clear solution to this problem. Let's push for it. And we won. We did it. We won the affordability argument. OER is clearly gaining momentum. But the challenge is, we're sort of in this position where we're the dogs that caught the car. So, we've been chasing the car for a long time, and now we're sort of there, we've done this, and it's like, now what? Because this is happening. We're starting to see the major publishers move into the OER space, or say they are moving into the OER space. Cengage launched a product called Open Now. They made the announcement for their first OER product the day before the 2017 Open Education Conference, which is like the 900-person major central event of the open education community in North America. They knew enough about our movement to time that announcement to where it would have the maximum impact. And what this is that they've taken a lot of OpenStack's content and other open materials, put it inside a platform, and then when a faculty adopts the material through their platform, It starts at just $30 per student. So, yeah, here's the thing. No, right. But here's the thing. Like, part of what open is enabling anyone, anywhere, to do anything they want with the material in any way that they can imagine. And that's powerful, and we need to support that. And part of that is doing things that we don't like. But what is wrong about this is calling it OER. So you, like, Cengage can go out there and take all the fantastic maybe I shouldn't talk about OpenStax. I'm going to talk about OpenStax. Take all of the OpenStax content, put it inside a platform, and sell it for whatever the heck they want. But once they do that, it's not open anymore. You can't have it both ways. What you get is the ability to build and add value on content that is flexible and free and open for you to use. But if you no longer are making it open, you don't get to call it OER anymore. And this is the line that we need to hold. And in the wise words of Nicole, open means free plus permission. Free and unfettered access, no cost, no barriers, plus permission, according to the 5 R's: retain, reuse, revise, remix, redistribute. But Cengage, I'm picking too much on Cengage. They're not the only ones that are doing this. Macmillan launched a product like this called Tellus Open Courses. They only charge $14.99. And like, it's enriched, yeah. Well, but it's like, if all this ever ends up accomplishing is getting students access to materials for $14.99, like, that's better than other Macmillan materials, and we shouldn't frown on that. But calling it open courses or OER is just wrong. That's not what it is. And hilariously, I actually went back to look at their website, and you go to the Tellus Open Courses page, and they have this like huge banner at the top that says, "Are you a student? Purchase here." Also, this was a headline. Top Hat makes access to OER free. How does that happen? There's a story behind it, but nevertheless, it's like there's confusion in this space, and we have a responsibility to articulate not just why OER makes materials affordable, but why open is better. And that's why I love so much of what Nicole said this morning. Sorry, it is really weird to say Nicole. I know. I keep like jumping back and forth anyway. But it's a pleasure to be at the same conference with the other. What was I saying? Nicole talked about how open isn't just about making materials affordable. It's actually about making them flexible, so faculty can have their materials speak to their own students, making sure that institutions have true ownership over the content that's being used in their teaching and learning. And we need to get better about articulating those benefits alongside the conversation about affordability, which of course remains an important part of this. And here's why. The biggest challenge we're facing from the commercial sector is not just open washing or co-opting of OER. It's actually co-opting of all of the affordability argument and the push for inclusive access. So this term inclusive access, for those of you who haven't heard it, it's the idea of where an institution strikes a deal with a publisher or another company, and students are automatically subscribed to digital materials for their course and build it as a course fee. So it's like automatic billing for materials. Students aren't buying their textbooks, so let's take that choice away from them and bill them directly for it. So this program, type of program, has been taking off rapidly. We don't have current numbers on it, but the numbers that we've seen and the estimates that financial analysts are making is that it is moving extremely rapidly, especially with major statewide deals like the ones that have been established in Ohio. We've had a heck of a time this year in the legislative session with state legislators introducing bills to support inclusive access. Publishers have gone to legislators who previously supported OER bills and pitched this as the next best thing. And like well-intentioned legislators have introduced bills like New York Senate 3661 relates to reducing the cost of textbooks for students. Nobody would oppose that, right? But what it actually does is direct all New York institutions to adopt policies that allow for inclusive access. And who's behind this? McGraw-Hill. They were behind a bill in Texas and Florida, and New Jersey. Texas and Florida failed, New Jersey passed. And this is only going to get more prevalent as the publishing industry consolidates. So many of you may have seen the second and third largest publishers in the market just announced that they're trying to merge. The merger won't be immediate. It would happen in like January of 2020 if it happens. I think the companies feel pretty strongly that it will. And what this will do is create a market where there are currently like 5 major players. This will take it down to basically 2 giants and then a few other players. The combined company, which I call McGraw-Hill. They're going to call it McGraw-Hill and Pearson. But the crux of it though is Cengage has announced this new product called Cengage Unlimited, which is a full catalog subscription where students can get access to all Cengage materials for $120 a semester. Which, if you're using 4 Cengage textbooks, is legitimately a good deal. But right now, this is getting some traction. But if they double their catalog to both McGraw and Cengage textbooks, this all of a sudden starts looking a heck of a lot like a big deal. So we're starting to see colleges sit down with publishers and sign these contracts. Some of them include quotas, that if you don't hit the quota and get enough faculty using these materials, you don't get the discount. So it hits the financial interest of the faculty, or of the institution against the faculty. If too many students opt out, which is required under federal regulations, the institution may lose money. So it pits the interest of students against the institution. We need to be asking a lot of questions about this, especially since we know where big deals end. Anybody in here from the library community knows, or anyone who reads the higher ed news knows that journal packages, journal subscription packages, Elsevier and other publishers, libraries started subscribing to full catalog subscriptions 20 years ago, and now the prices have risen so rapidly that they're having to find their way out of long-term deals and come up with new systems of providing access to the journal articles. And then there are all of these issues that come up about student data. And as we look at the financial drivers behind why the publishing industry is pushing so aggressively for inclusive access in the state houses, federal level, at institutions, it's all about getting digital materials into the hands of students. Because once there's a data generating machine in every student's hands, they can start developing comprehensive data sets. And it's going to reach a point where publishers may know more about our students than the institutions do. And that leads to all sorts of potential complications around loss of control of data and infrastructure and the ability to understand what's happening on campuses. And it poses all sorts, in the age of Cambridge Analytica, it poses all sorts of legal and reputational risks for institutions. And so far, a lot of campus data policies and privacy policies aren't addressing strategic uses of data. They're addressing the how to prevent unauthorized use rather than how to strategically authorize use. So I realize I've gotten totally dark, and if you can't see that, it's a dumpster on fire floating in a flood. So we can devolve into very dark futures very quickly. But this is real. We're at the beginning of this right now, but this is where the future can go. And the OER movement has an opportunity and a responsibility to make sure that we're making the case on our campuses for why open is better, why we should have ownership over the content we use in classes, and faculty should know where the data goes. Spark just put out this landscape analysis that does a deep dive into the publishing industry and some of their strategies, and we are at a critical juncture, and there are individual and collective actions that we can take to help start addressing some of these issues. They're bigger than just reducing the cost of textbooks. This is actually a fight for the future of higher education and maintaining control of the teaching and learning that happens at our institutions. And that is why it is so wonderful that all of you are here together and able to connect with each other and have a supportive community, have support from the state, from your governor, from your high-level leadership at your institutions. And I think this ties directly back to where I started the talk and thinking about this idea of be the person you've been waiting for. Think about the challenges you see and think about the tools that you have to start addressing that at your institution. Because this only changes if people like us step up and do it. Okay, I said I wasn't going to go the whole time, and I totally have. I'm sorry. We still have time, right?
We still have a few minutes for questions.
Okay, cool.
Any questions?
You turn the lights.
Oh, yeah.
I see a silhouette of a hand.
Yes, I'm just wondering if there's been any articulation of support or notice out of Betsy Voss, for example, at that level, with regard to this movement of OER.
No. So what DeVos has done is allowed the Go Open initiative to continue, which I think has been really important for the K-12 level. So I think to the extent, I think that's an important thing that's come out of this department. That a lot of times when a new person comes in, they sort of shut down all the old initiatives. And while they're not continuing to sort of fund it, they've allowed it to continue and be supported on the department website, which I think is meaningful.
Any other questions? Probably enough time for one more.
I have a question about long-term strategy. In your second to last, the last statement, especially about the moneyed publishers taking over your piggybacking on the moon that started. There's this nostalgia about something that was really clean and pure and now it's not. How should that evolve to be strong, but not be create its own walls? This is us and this is you.
Yeah.
We have to. These publishers have petabytes, exabytes of content. Eventually, that has to come out.
Yeah.
And become part of OER. We can probably recreate it, but just like Wikipedia recreated the encyclopedias of old, but it's not the same thing. We need that as well.
So I want to be clear that I'm not saying that this should be about us and them. I know that yesterday, Sarah, you talked about don't demonize the publishers, and I don't think it's useful to do that. I think it's useful to recognize what the challenges that our institutions are facing, and think about open as a way that we can build a framework that serves our needs as the academic community in ways that align with our values. And while, at least in the short term, it is just fact that there are going to be commercial vendors in this space, and a whole range of them. And there are steps that institutions can take, though, to make sure that the relationships that they have with those vendors are aligned with their values, making sure that there's strong terms and conditions that protect student data, avoiding contracts where your interests are counter to the interests of your faculty and students, not signing NDAs so that the terms of your negotiations are hidden from the public or other institutions. There are immediate steps that can be taken like that, but there are also long-term steps, especially when we're talking about the infrastructure that we're using for teaching and learning, that this content either goes into or sits on top of. We need to make sure that we're not ceding control of that to outside entities. We already have ceded control of so much. The scholarly publishing is a key example of that, where for ages we've just given away the copyright to research-produced institutions that have to buy that back in journals. How can we think 10 steps ahead right now about what the infrastructure we need in the future is going to look like? And that includes content. And take steps to make sure that we're preparing for that, whether that's taking steps to make sure vendor relationships align with our values or working together to develop community-owned solutions.
I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of that. I work in the accessibility office with the students with disabilities, and I work with publishers fairly regularly, so it becomes very apparent that it's really important to take a really, I don't want to say a hard stance, but to be kind of firm. Publishers have a tendency to be very persuasive and convince you that, no, this is totally what you need. And just to be aware that, just because they say that's what it is, does not necessarily mean that it is, and it's totally fine to go back to them and say, no, this is what it needs to be, and you won't be interacting until that's fixed. And they do have a tendency to push a lot. You just have to be prepared to push back, basically.
I mean, it's their job. They exist to make money for their shareholders. That is not wrong. It's what they do. And so it is on higher ed to set the rules and make sure that they're holding vendors to standards that align with values.
Well, thank you again.